Now that we know how to solve equations, let's look at some word problems. And whenever we're presented with a word problem, there are a few guidelines that we want to follow. The first one is to read the problem. And while it seems like this would be obvious, I have to constantly remind people to do this. The first time you read the problem, you should not be immediately wondering what you should be doing or trying to identify key information. You should just read the problem and make sure you understand exactly what it's asking without realizing how to figure that out. This is something that, like I said, seems really obvious, but I often ask students, what are you supposed to be finding? And they don't know because they never actually read the problem. The next step is identify the variable. Exactly what is it that you want to find and what letter are you going to use to find it? Third step, translate from words to algebra. Now is whenever we want to start actually writing down the equations and trying to figure out exactly what we want to do. Step 4, now that we have our equation, let's solve it. And then finally, step 5, check your answer. And I also can't stress the importance of this. Even if it's just checking to make sure it makes common sense. I've had people tell me that if I invested money and that it would double within 30 seconds. And that's something that you should obviously see that there's an error. I've also had people give me negative numbers when I ask for how many people, which is something that should indicate that you have a problem because something is not right. Your answer doesn't actually make sense. Let's look at our first example. Let's say we have a rental car company that charges $25 per day and 20 cents per mile to rent a car. And let's suppose we actually rented a car for 2 days and we know that our total bill was $108. So the question now is, how many miles did we actually drive? So I'm going to let M be equal to the number of miles we drove. We know we had to pay $25 for each day we had this car, and we had it for 2 days. Plus we had to pay 20 cents for every mile. And we don't know how many miles we drove, but we know that this should add up to be 108 because we know that this is how much we paid. Well, 25 times 2 is 50. Oh, not equal. We can then subtract 50 from both sides. That gives me that 0.20 M is equal to 58. And then we can divide both sides by that 20 cents. So in these 2 days, we drove 290 miles. Sometimes in equations, it's helpful to already know formulas. And one of the most basic ones that we have is interest. Anytime we're borrowing money, we have to pay back the amount plus interest. And there are a few ways this is calculated, but the most basic type is simple interest. And here's our formula, I equal to PRT. I is the amount of interest. P is the principal. And the principal is either how much we invested or how much we borrowed, depending on what kind of interest this is, whether we're making interest or we're paying it. R is the rate that we have, that our interest rate, and T is time in years. So let's look at an example. Let's suppose that you inherit $100,000 and you want to invest this into 2 different accounts. One pays 5% interest and another pays 6.5% interest. We know that total we got $5,900 in interest per year. So we want to know how much is done at the first rate and how much is done at the second. Well, We're going to have to slightly modify this formula, but we can figure it out. So P, let's say we invested X dollars in 5%. So P is X. Our rate is 0.05, and this is for 1 year, so time would be 1. But that's not all of our interest. That's just for the one account. We also have another account. And I'm going to leave a blank for how much we invested there for just a second. The rate is 0.065, and then once again times 1 year. So we don't want to give this another letter because we don't really know how to deal with two variables, but we do know that it was the rest of the money. So if I take all the money and subtract out how much I invested in the first account, I should get how much I invested in the second account. So simplifying this, 0.05x plus, well, we have 100,000 times 0.065 minus x times 0.065. So 5900 equal to 6500 minus 0.015x. I'm going to need to subtract the 65,000 from both sides. 59,000 minus 65, or 5,900 minus 6,500 is negative 600, equal to minus 0.015x. And then I can divide by that. Divide both sides by that 0.015, and I get $40,000 is equal to x. So one account had 40,000, so the other one has to have 60,000 so that it adds up to be the full 100,000. We may also use formulas that we know from other math subjects. As an example, let's suppose that we have a woman who's 5.5 feet tall, and she's trying to figure out how tall a building is. At this point, what she knows is that the shadow of the building is 30 feet, and her shadow is 3.3 feet. So while technically these triangles should be facing the same direction, that's okay. Similar triangles from geometry tells me that her height divided by the height of the building should be equal to her shadow divided by the shadow of the building. Whenever we have two fractions and nothing else, we can cross multiply. So 5.5 times 30 is 165, equal to 3.3x. Divide both sides by 3.3 to get the height of the building is 50 feet.